Not only did I get to introduce President Donald John Trump at an event at Mar-a-Lago, I now get to pretend that he actually listened to one of my tweets from back in March. Viva Fry, former Montreal litigator turned current Florida rumbler, in my home office for yet another car vlog. You all asked for more car vlogs. I shall deliver to you more car vlogs. Today, Trump put out a Truth Social post, and I dare say, if he didn't follow the tweet that I put out from March, my goodness, do I get to pretend that he did. But before we even get there, do you all remember that moment when I got to introduce Donald John Trump at an event at Mar-a-Lago? I remember that day. I will never forget that day. In case you didn't see it, here's a video of that moment when I introduced the President of these United States of America, Donald John Trump.
I read that warrant, and you weren't allowed to look at the content without a subsequent warrant, identifying with particularity the things to be searched and seized. That's the language of the Fourth Amendment.
Professor, if I may interrupt you, I think you might have your client here who could testify as to whether or not it was solicitor-client privilege. I was looking in the back and I thought I saw someone I recognized, and I think I do recognize him. That's President Trump.
The event at the time was an event on lawfare, and there was Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, and a number of other people there celebrating John Eastman's The Eastman Dilemma documentary. And I'm up there moderating a panel, and I'm looking in the back, and I'm like, that looks an awful lot like a cardboard cutout of Donald John Trump. And lo and behold, it wasn't a cardboard cutout. It was the man himself. Anyhow, an amazing event, an amazing moment of my life, and I will not forget it, nor will I forget that moment when I get to pretend that Donald Trump was listening to a tweet of mine from March. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, this all relates to a Truth Social post that Donald Trump posted today. It's September 1st, the day before my 18th wedding anniversary with my wife. On September 1st, Donald Trump put out a Truth Social post which reads as follows. Donald J. Trump at Real Donald Trump. It is very important that the drug companies justify the success of their various COVID drugs. Many people think they are a miracle that saved millions of lives. Others disagree. With CDC being ripped apart over this question, I want the answer, and I want it now. I have been shown information from Pfizer and others that is extraordinary, but they never seem to show those results to the public. Why not? They go off on the next, quote, hunt, end quote, and let everyone rip themselves apart, including Bobby Kennedy Jr. and CDC, trying to figure out the success or failure of the drug company's COVID work. They show me great numbers and results, but they don't seem to be showing them to many others. I want them to show them now to CDC and the public and clear up this mess one way or another. I hope Operation Warp Speed was as, quote, brilliant, end quote, as many say it was. If not, we all want to know about it and why. Thank you for your attention to this very important matter, President DJT. Now, for those of you who have been following Donald Trump for any extended period of time, you will note that this is a remarkable change in tactic from his prior statements as relates to Operation Warp Speed, the success of the so-called COVID jab, and other matters related to COVID. This is a remarkable change. This is like a boat changing tack by 90 degrees. I would say 180 degrees, but it's not quite going in the opposite direction, and I would say 360 degrees, except it would then be going in the same direction. This is a remarkable change of tack, and if you had forgotten about the prior statements Trump made as relates to Operation Warp Speed, the success of the jab, just go back to that video where he gave a comment in front of a stadium of people praising the drug companies, and he was met with boos and jeers from the crowd. And Trump has a very interesting way of expressing himself. Sometimes he will say things that other people believe when they are things that he himself believes, but by saying other people believe them, it sort of persuades you into thinking other people believe them. Trump is the one who thinks that Operation Warp Speed was a smashing success. He has said it many, many times, to the point where I said, you gotta stop saying it, because there's a lot of people out there who do not think Operation Warp Speed was a smashing success. There are a lot of people out there who feel that they were injured by that jab, and true Operation Warp Speed was not about making a one-size-fits-all jab for everyone to be mandated, failing which they lose their jobs. Operation Warp Speed had an intended purpose. It was intended to derive something of a vaccine to the extent you could, while also pursuing other methods of treatment, it was never intended to be a one-size-fits-all mandate for the general public. Others suggested that Operation Warp Speed was a failed venture from the get-go because there's one thing you can't force in science, and that is the mere passage of time. Setting all that aside, I had to go back and dig up a tweet of mine from March 2024 in which I basically laid out the groundwork for what I thought Donald Trump needed to do in order to win over the people who love Donald Trump but do not love Operation Warp Speed or the product of that failed venture. And this is my tweet from March 2024, and by gum, if Trump didn't follow that tweet, I get to pretend he did because you'll see when I read my tweet. This is in response to a truth post from Donald J. Trump at Real Donald Trump. Quote, "The pandemic no longer controls our lives. The vaccines that saved us from COVID are now being used to help beat cancer, turning setback into comeback," end quote. You're welcome, Joe. 9-month approval time versus 12 years that it would have taken you. Now, I forget if it was a direct quote from Joe Biden, but you get the idea here. This is Joe Biden at the time trying to take credit for what was being passed off as the success of the mRNA jab and how it could be applied to cancer. Let us not forget Joe Biden's election promise to literally cure cancer. Holy crab apples. But this is in response to a quote, direct or paraphrasing from Joe Biden. And I'm like, my goodness, Donald Trump, read the room. People don't love this as much as you think they should. And that is where my quote tweet comes in. Now, it's a little long, but bear with me. Trump is getting raked for this truth post, and rightly so. The steel man is that Biden is now exploiting the, quote, success, end quote, of the experimental mRNA jab to use it in the fight against cancer. For those who have forgotten his idiotic 2020 campaign promise, Biden promised to, quote, cure cancer, end quote, if elected. So Trump doesn't want Biden taking credit for what Trump developed. The problem is that the experimental mRNA jab didn't even cure or prevent COVID. We are a long way away from that technology being potentially useful to cure cancer. Ironically, many would say the jab is in fact causing cancers. Trump is still trying to tout as a success a shot that has injured or killed countless people. It is not just a politically damaging position to take. It is becoming increasingly obvious that the, quote, success, end quote, of the jab is arguable at best. The jab will go down in history as an abject disaster. Trump needs to read Brooke Jackson's whistleblower complaint. He needs to understand that Fauci lied to him and to us. He needs to understand that Pfizer lied to him and to us. He needs to understand that Moderna lied to him and to us. He needs to understand that, quote, Operation Warp Speed, end quote, was co-opted from its initial purpose and weaponized into an excuse to mass vaccinate even those that did not need any such vaccine in the first place. He needs to understand that the data was falsified, the risks were concealed, and the manufactured delivered products was not what was approved in any event. He then needs to publicly admit this and vow to go after those responsible, those who lied to him and to us, those who are responsible for the irreparable harm that so many people have suffered. Otherwise, continuing to take pride in this experimental shot will continue to cause him potentially critical political damage in general, and in particular among those whose support he desperately needs and those who desperately want to support him. In my humble opinion, respectfully submitted. Now, for those of you who are new to the channel, the Brooke Jackson Key Tam lawsuit is a lawsuit in which Robert Barnes is representing a whistleblower named Brooke Jackson, who worked on the Pfizer trials and who blew the whistle on the crappy, half-assed, totally shoddy trials, who was talking about how awful it was, how they were falsifying results, how it was basically a crap show from beginning to end, and everything that they said they achieved in results was actual total bunk. We now know, and I've interviewed Maddie DeGarry's parents, that Pfizer was literally writing off those injured by the jab during the trials. Maddie DeGarry, who has now suffered permanent injury from the jab, I think it's transverse myelitis if I'm not mistaken, she was literally written out of the adverse events as having had a tummy ache. Operation Warp Speed was intended to find a jab for those that were vulnerable while finding other treatments for those who didn't need the jab, while pursuing other therapeutics to treat the symptoms that was COVID. It was never intended to have been turned into the monster that it was turned into. We know that Fauci lied. We know that Fauci lied to the point where he needed a pardon from Demented Joe on his way out the door. But you know who didn't get a pardon? Albert Bourla didn't get a pardon, and Albert Bourla lied. Here's a tweet from Albert Bourla on April 1st, 2021. So maybe his defense is going to be it was an April Fool's joke. Albert Bourla at Albert Bourla. Excited to share that updated analysis from our phase 3 study with BioNTech also showed our COVID-19 vaccine was 100% effective in preventing hashtag COVID-19 cases in South Africa. 100%. 9:46 a.m. April 1st, 2021. Well, the April Fool's joke is on you, Albert Bourla. You didn't get a pardon. You lied, and I dare say you belong in jail. But we're not yet there. Right now, we're only at a 90-degree changing of tack, and Donald Trump is saying, you showed me a bunch of wonderful results. You showed me a bunch of wonderful figures. Show them to the public and let the aggregate knowledge of the interwebs, let the crowdsourcing of the truth determine whether or not you lied, whether or not you falsified those results. You don't need 75 years to release those results. results. Release them now. We will find out if you lied and people died, and we will determine the next proper course of action. And before we get after the proper course of action, who should be prosecuted and how long they should be jailed for, if you're still watching this video and you haven't subscribed yet, what do I need to do to get you to subscribe? Hit the subscribe button down there, turn on notifications, drop a comment in the comment section, share my channel with someone who you think would love it, and share it with someone who you know would hate it because they need it the most. But before we get into what ought to be the next steps in this process and which lawyers should be involved, we need to appreciate this is a wild change of position from Donald Trump. It's the beginning, and we are only 7 months into his presidency. We got another 3 and some odd years of justice, or at least the possibility, the faint, remote possibility of justice for all of those who have been injured by this toxic jab. I genuinely believe this COVID jab will go down as the most toxic failure of an attempt at a rushed job. Garbage in, garbage out. But the bottom line is Trump really is changing position here, subtly, not radically, all at once. And we're going to see what happens, because he just put out a truth post the other day, which some people were suggesting was channeling some Q stuff. I don't care about that. But bottom line, when he says you are all going to see the truth, whenever Trump posts something, it's because he has more information than he is letting on in the post, because the man has access to pretty much all the information right now. We are dealing with a man who they have tried to put in jail, bankrupt, and then kill. And I think he may or may not have discovered that he was lied to through their teeth from day one. They lied to him so that he would cut the red tape and let them make literally billions of dollars in profits off that failed jab, only so that they could then only release the fact that they had a jab, purportedly, after he was out of office, or at least after Joe Biden allegedly beat him in that election, because they didn't want to release the information before the election because it might have actually helped him. They lied to him. They made billions as a result. They belong in jail, and we are one step closer to that course of action happening in real time. So that is the update from having introduced the president at an event to now getting to pretend he actually listened to my tweet. I'm going to do it anyhow, and no one can prove me wrong. If you like what I do, you know what to do, but most importantly, exercise, eat healthy, sunlight, talk to people in real life, and now you know your vlog. Peace out, peeps. Booyah!